The light that streamed through the tall, arched windows of Dana Jones's Upper West Side apartment on the morning of November 20th, 1988, seemed to possess a special, consecrated quality. It was a soft, gilded luminescence, the kind of light one imagines in Renaissance paintings, reserved for days of profound, earth-altering significance. It was a light that promised perfection, that smoothed over the city's rough, concrete edges and whispered of fairy tale endings, a promise as beautiful and as fragile as a shard of glass. For Dana, watching her daughter Lydia sit before a vanity mirror, wreathed in that impossible light, it was a moment she wanted to capture, to press between the pages of her memory and keep safe from the ravages of time. Lydia Jones, at 27 years of age, was a symphony of contrasts. There was the breathtaking bride, her cascade of blonde hair being expertly pinned by a stylist into an elegant chignon that revealed the graceful line of her neck. And then there was the surgeon, her brilliant blue eyes, even now, scanning a dog-eared copy of the New England Journal of Medicine propped precariously against a perfume bottle. That was Lydia, a mind that never stopped, a heart that had finally found its place to rest. She moved with the quiet, devastating confidence of a woman who had fought for her place in a world of men twice her age. Yet today, a giddy, almost girlish excitement bubbled just beneath the surface. Today, she was not Dr. Jones, chief resident in cardiothoracic surgery. She was simply a bride, on the precipice of the greatest adventure of her life. If you start reciting the components of the coagulation cascade, I'm confiscating that journal until after the honeymoon, Dana said, her voice a gentle tease as she placed a delicate porcelain cup of chamomile tea on the cluttered vanity. The scent of the tea mixed with the floral notes of Lydia's perfume and the faint, chemical smell of hairspray, a strange but not unpleasant olfactory cocktail for the morning. Lydia looked up, her intense professional focus melting away to reveal the joyful, luminous young woman beneath. A smile, wide and genuine, lit up her face. "Sorry, Mom. Old habits die hard. Nathan and I have a long-standing bet on who can name all 12 cranial nerves the fastest. I have no intention of losing, even in a $5,000 wedding dress." "That man," Dana said, shaking her head with a deep, fond smile that reached her eyes. "Nathan Landry is the only person I have ever met who can not only keep up with you, but seems to delight in the challenge." "He doesn't just keep up," Lydia said softly, her gaze turning distant and tender, her eyes fixed on her own reflection, but seeing something else entirely, a smile, a memory, a feeling. "He calms the race. He makes the world feel quiet. With him, my mind could just be still. It's the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me." That was the fundamental truth of their union. Dr. Nathan Landry, at 29, was Lydia's anchor in the relentless storm of their chosen profession. He was a general surgeon, equally brilliant, but where Lydia was a fiery, focused comet, Nathan was the calm, steady gravity that kept her in a joyful orbit. He possessed a warmth that drew people in, a deep well of empathy that made him not just a great surgeon, but a great healer. Theirs was a love story forged in the crucible of 80-hour work weeks, of life and death decisions made under the harsh glare of operating room lights. It was a love fueled by coffee and stolen moments in deserted hospital cafeterias at 3 a.m., of a shared, sacred understanding of the profound fragility of the human body and the resilience of the human spirit. He was from a loud, sprawling, ebullient family in Queens, his laughter a booming counterpoint to the city's symphony. She was the quiet, introspective only child of a widowed art historian from the hushed, book-lined avenues of the Upper West Side. Their worlds, on paper, couldn't have been more different. But in the shared reality of their life's work, in the silent understanding that passed between them over a patient's bedside, they had found a universe all their own. Across town, in a sprawling hotel suite with a panoramic view of a sun-drenched Central Park, Nathan was engaged in a losing battle with his bow tie. His best man, Dr. Ben Carter, a fellow surgeon with a perpetually sardonic wit, leaned against the doorframe, laughing at his friend's uncharacteristic clumsiness. "Nate, my man, you can resect a colon and perform a flawless anastomosis with your eyes closed, but you can't tie a simple knot? This is a crisis of confidence I never thought I'd witness." "This is not a simple knot, Ben. This is a matrimonial knot. It is symbolic of the sacred union I am about to enter," Nathan retorted, a wide, irrepressible grin spreading across his handsome face. He gave up on the tie and turned to face his friend, his hands spreading wide. "But seriously, how do I look? Like a man who's about to marry the most brilliant, beautiful, and frankly, intimidating woman in the 5 boroughs," Ben said, his voice softening with genuine affection. "The tux is fine, Nate. She would marry you if you showed up in bloodstained scrubs. She would marry you if you showed up in a garbage bag. That woman worships the ground you walk on. We all see it. The way she looks at you when you're presenting in grand rounds. It's a miracle the patient charts in the front row don't spontaneously combust." Nathan's smile softened into something more vulnerable. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed outside the confines of his own heart. "I know. I wanted A to be perfect for her. Absolutely, unequivocally perfect. She deserves all the perfect days in the world. And for a time it was. The ceremony at St. James Church on Madison Avenue was a masterpiece of understated elegance, a quiet testament to a love that didn't need grand pronouncements. The light, tinted jewel-toned by the magnificent stained glass windows, bathed the sanctuary in a holy glow. The air was heavy with the rich, heady scent of thousands of white roses and lilies, a fragrant cloud that seemed to muffle the sounds of the city outside. When Lydia, on the arm of her proud uncle, began her walk down the long aisle, a collective, involuntary hush fell over the assembled guests. She was more than beautiful. She was radiant, a celestial being in ivory lace, her smile a beacon of pure, unadulterated joy. Nathan, standing at the altar, felt his breath catch in his throat. He was a man of science, of logic and reason, but in that moment, he believed in miracles. A single, happy tear escaped his eye and traced a slow path down his cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. Their vows, which they had written themselves in the quiet hours after a grueling shared shift, were a reflection of their unique, profound bond. They spoke not of fairy tale romance, of princes and princesses, but of a deep and abiding partnership. They spoke of being each other's calm in the storm, of respecting the hands that healed and the minds that raced against time. They promised to be the one who would always listen, truly listen, after a 36-hour shift, the one who would understand the silent, heavy weight of a life lost on the operating table, and the one who would pop the champagne to celebrate every life saved. They promised to be each other's home. When the minister, his own eyes glistening, pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in a joyous, heartfelt applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old stone building, a wave of love and support washing over the new couple. The reception that followed, held in the legendary, opulent grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, was a vibrant, joyous affair where 2 very different worlds collided and merged into one. The Landry family, a whirlwind of laughter, soul music, and unrestrained energy, enveloped the Joneses' more reserved circle of academics, artists, and old-money friends in a warm, irresistible embrace. World-renowned surgeons let loose on the dance floor with Nathan's cousins from Queens, and nurses who had stood by Lydia's side through harrowing procedures now stood by to fix the train of her dress. It was a perfect melting pot of a celebration, a testament to the love that had brought them all together. The toasts were heartfelt and humorous, windows into the lives of the bride and groom. Ben Carter recounted a hilarious and slightly embellished story of Nathan falling asleep mid-suture during his intern year, only to be woken by Lydia with a gentle, discreet nudge and a perfectly timed handoff of the next required instrument, saving him from the wrath of the attending surgeon. Dana, her voice trembling but resonant with a mother's fierce pride, spoke of Lydia's unyielding determination from the time she was a little girl who performed surgeries on her dolls with plastic tweezers. "I have never seen my daughter so completely, so peacefully herself as when she is with Nathan, Dana concluded, her gaze sweeping over the happy couple as she raised her champagne flute. He doesn't just love her, he sees her. He understands the brilliant, complicated, beautiful machinery of her heart. And for a mother, there is no greater gift, no deeper peace. To Lydia and Nathan. Later in the evening, as the band shifted from upbeat dance numbers to a soft, romantic melody, Nathan took Lydia by the hand and led her out onto a deserted terrace. The cool November night air was a welcome reprieve from the warmth of the ballroom, and it carried the faint sounds of city life, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of the subway, the murmur of a city that never slept. Below them, the lights of Central Park South twinkled like a carpet of fallen stars. "Happy, Mrs. Landry," he whispered into her hair, his arms wrapping around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Ecstatic Dr. Landry," she murmured back, her head leaning back to rest against his chest. She closed her eyes, savoring the feeling of his strength surrounding her. "I wish we could just stay in this moment forever. Just press pause on the universe." "We don't need to," he promised, his arms tightening around her as he kissed the side of her neck. "We have a lifetime of moments ahead of us. An entire library of them. This is just the first page of the first chapter." Their departure from the hotel was a scene of pure movie magic, a perfect final shot for a perfect day. Guests lined the grand hotel steps, laughing and cheering, showering them with handfuls of white rose petals that fluttered in the air like gentle snow. A sleek black limousine was waiting at the curb, its driver holding the door open, but Nathan just grinned, shook his head, and pointed towards the street. A few blocks away, at a private heliport on the Hudson, a helicopter sat waiting, its blades already beginning a slow, rhythmic whir, its navigation lights blinking in the deepening twilight. It was his final surprise, a grand, romantic gesture to kick off their forever. "Oh, Nathan, you didn't," Lydia breathed, her eyes wide with a delight so pure it was childlike. "Only the best for my bride," he said, kissing her deeply as their friends and family cheered and whistled. "A tour of our city from the heavens. Then off to our honeymoon in Bali, and then our life." They climbed into the helicopter's plush cabin, turning to wave one last time to the sea of smiling, beloved faces below. As the helicopter lifted off, a powerful, graceful ascent into the twilight sky, Dana stood on the steps, her hand held up in a final wave, a single rose petal clinging to her hair. She watched until the aircraft was just another blinking light among the millions of others that made up the city's glittering necklace. A profound sense of peace, deep and all-encompassing, washed over her. Her daughter, her brilliant, beautiful Lydia, was safe. She was loved. Her life, a life of such incredible promise, was just beginning. The world below them was a glittering, electric tapestry, a breathtaking cartography of light and shadow. As the helicopter climbed higher, the familiar, chaotic grid of Manhattan streets transformed into something ordered and beautiful, a vast, complex circuit board humming with the energy of 8 million lives. The roar of the rotors was a powerful, cocooning sound, a white noise that insulated them from the world below, sealing them in their own private bubble of newly-wedded bliss. The pilot, a stoic, middle-aged man named Frank with a reassuringly calm demeanor, had passed back a chilled bottle of Dom Perignon, and Nathan, with a surgeon's steady hand, expertly popped the cork. The fizzing explosion was the only sound that pierced the drone of the engines. "To us," he said, his voice full of a deep, resonant joy as he handed a crystal flute to Lydia. The reflection of the city, 1,000 points of light, danced in her wide, happy eyes. To a lifetime of navigating crazy on-call schedules, stealing kisses in the supply closets, and arguing over who gets to be first author on our next big paper. Lydia laughed, a pure, carefree sound that the pilot could hear faintly through his noise-canceling headset. It made him smile. "I'll always be first author, and you know it. But," she added, her eyes twinkling mischievously, "I'll let you be first author on our kids." We'll name them alphabetically by your publications." "Deal, deal," Nathan said, his expression softening as he looked at her. The love he felt for her, so immense, it was a physical presence in the small cabin. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of blonde hair that had escaped her elegant chignon behind her ear. His fingers lingered for a moment on the soft skin of her temple. "Can you believe it, LYD? We're actually here. After all the studying, all the exams, all the 36-hour shifts, we did it. We're married." "We did it," she agreed, her voice barely a whisper, a sound of quiet awe. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, her gaze fixed on the iconic, verdigris beacon of the Statue of Liberty in the harbor. "Think of all the things we're going to do, Nate. The papers will write that will change the way medicine is practiced. The lives we'll save, the families we'll put back together. The house we'll buy upstate, the one with the big wraparound porch you've always wanted, where you can read your history books in the sun. And the 2 dogs will get to fill it," he added immediately, their shared dream a well-rehearsed, beloved script. "A goofy golden retriever for you, who will probably eat the furniture. And a grumpy, old man bulldog for me, who will just snore on the porch. And kids," she said, her voice softer now, turning from the window to look directly at him. Her eyes were serious, full of a deep, yearning hope. "A little girl with your smile and your kind eyes. And a little boy with my stubborn refusal to ever admit I'm wrong. God help us," he chuckled, the sound a warm rumble in the cabin. He pulled her closer, her head finding its familiar place in the crook of his shoulder. "But yeah, kids, I can't wait to be a father with you, Lydia. I can't wait to teach them, to watch them grow. I can't wait for all of it." They fell into a comfortable, companionable silence then, a silence filled with unspoken promises and shared dreams. They sipped their champagne and watched the city scroll by beneath them like a live-action movie. They flew over the shimmering, catenary curve of the Brooklyn Bridge, the dark, rectangular expanse of Central Park, a quiet heart in the midst of the urban chaos, and the twin, towering sentinels of the World Trade Center, symbols of the city's unyielding ambition. It was their kingdom, the city that had demanded so much of them, that had pushed them to their limits and beyond. They had met its challenge through sheer force of will and intellect, and now it was laying itself at their feet, a sparkling tribute to their victory. It was as they were banking over the dark, slick ribbon of the East River, the lights of Queens and Brooklyn a glittering shoreline, heading back towards the heliport, that the first violent shudder rocked the cabin. It wasn't the gentle dip and sway of turbulence. It was a mechanical, grinding jolt, a sickening, unnatural lurch that sloshed the expensive champagne from their glasses, the cold liquid splashing onto Lydia's pristine ivory dress. "What was that?" Lydia asked, her surgeon's mind instantly shifting from romance to analysis, her body tensing. She gripped the side of her leather seat, her knuckles turning white beneath her perfect manicure. Up front, in the cockpit, Frank the pilot was no longer a picture of calm. His face was a mask of disbelief and dawning terror as he frantically scanned his instruments. A cacophony of warning alarms, silent just moments before, began to blare, a shrill, piercing chorus of electronic doom that shattered their peaceful bubble. "Mayday, mayday, mayday!" The pilot yelled into his headset, his voice tight and strained with a panic he was desperately trying to control. "This is November Golf Bravo 6. I have a catastrophic engine failure. I've lost the tail rotor. I repeat, I have lost yaw control. I'm going down. What does that mean?" Nathan demanded, his own body instantly tense, his voice sharp with authority, his protective instincts on high alert as he shielded Lydia with his arm, pulling her away from the window. "It means we're spinning," Frank shouted back over the deafening, unholy shriek of protesting metal and the howl of the wind. "Hold on," and they were. The helicopter, no longer a graceful machine of flight, had become a spinning top of terror, a metal coffin in a horrifying, uncontrolled descent. The city lights, once a beautiful, ordered tapestry, blurred into violent, nauseating streaks of red and white and gold. The inexorable laws of physics, of lift and thrust, had turned against them, betrayed them. Lydia could feel the sickening, weightless drop in her stomach, the feeling that precedes a catastrophic impact. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind a maelstrom of fear and utter disbelief. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. Not now. Not after everything. It was a silent, desperate scream to a deaf universe. She reached out, her hand flailing in the chaotic darkness of the cabin, and her fingers found Nathan's. His grip was strong, a final, desperate anchor in a world that had come completely unmoored. She forced her eyes open and looked at him. In the flashing, strobe-like red glow of the warning lights, she saw not fear in his eyes, but an expression of infinite, heartbreaking love and a profound, devastating sorrow for the life they were about to lose. He was mouthing her name, his voice lost in the cacophony. Lydia. The impact was absolute, a final, world-ending cataclysm. It was a sound and a feeling beyond description, a concussive explosion of force that seemed to rip the very fabric of reality apart. Metal shrieked and tore, glass shattered into a million glittering fragments. And then came the bone-jarring, final collision with the black, unforgiving, icy water of the East River. And then silence. A profound, crushing, watery silence, broken only by the faint, dying hiss of steam and the gentle, indifferent lapping of the river against the mangled, twisted wreckage of a beautiful dream. The telephone's shrill, insistent ring was a violent intrusion, cutting through the quiet hum of post-celebration satisfaction in Dana Jones's apartment. She had just changed from her elegant mother-of-the-bride dress into a comfortable silk robe, a contented smile playing on her lips as she replayed the day's perfect, golden moments in her mind. She assumed it was Lydia, calling from their hotel before jetting off to Bali, her voice no doubt bubbling with happiness and excitement. She's probably forgotten her toothbrush, Dana chuckled to herself, a warm, maternal thought as she picked up the receiver from its cradle. She's a brilliant surgeon, but she can't pack a suitcase to save her life. Hello. The voice on the other end of the line was not her daughter's. It was a man's voice, hesitant and heavy with a practiced, professional somberness that made the fine hairs on Dana's arms stand up. A cold dread, swift and unreasoning, began to seep into her bones. Am I speaking with Mrs. Dana Jones, the mother of Dr. Lydia Jones Landry? Yes, Dana said, her voice suddenly small and thin in the silent apartment. The knot of ice in her stomach tightened. Who is this? Ma'am, my name is Officer Calloway with the New York City Police Department, 17th Precinct. Ma'am, there's been an accident. An incident involving a helicopter in the East River. We have reason to believe your daughter and her husband were on board. The world didn't just tilt on its axis. It ceased to exist altogether. The words were a foreign language, a collection of sounds that refused to form a coherent meaning. Accident. Helicopter. On board. They were puzzle pieces from different boxes. They couldn't possibly fit together. No, Dana said, her voice a strangled whisper. She shook her head, as if she could physically negate his words. No, you're mistaken. That's impossible. They're on their way to their honeymoon. They're going to Bali. They're safe. Ma'am, the officer said, his voice a terrible blend of gentleness and firmness. We need you to come down to the 17th Precinct. Can we send a patrol car for you? Dana dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the officer's distant, tinny voice a meaningless squawk emanating from the fallen receiver. A primal scream, a sound of animal agony, built in her chest, a volcanic pressure of grief and disbelief, but it wouldn't come out. She was frozen, a statue in her silk robe, trapped in a nightmare of roaring static and profound, terrifying silence. The days that followed were a surreal, foggy hell, a landscape of muted colors and muffled sounds. The chaos of the recovery scene at the edge of the river, a horrific tableau of police boats, dive teams, and the incessant, strobing flash of red and blue lights painting the dark, oily water in ghoulish strokes. The grim-faced officials who spoke in empty platitudes about a thorough investigation and a tragic loss for the city. The endless, suffocating stream of visitors to her apartment, friends and colleagues, their faces etched with a pity she couldn't bear to look at, their well-meaning casseroles and heartfelt condolences feeling like a gross intrusion on a grief so monumental it felt sacred, a private, holy terror. The joint funeral was a citywide event, a somber spectacle. St. Patrick's Cathedral was overflowing, a testament to the lives Lydia and Nathan had touched. There was a constellation of New York's medical elite, the mayor, colleagues from the hospital, the Landry family huddled together in a solid mass of shared grief, and Dana, a solitary, stoic figure in the front pew, hidden behind a black veil. She listened to the eloquent, moving eulogies that praised the brilliance, the compassion, the boundless promise of two lives cut tragically short. But as she listened to the story of their lives being told in the past tense, a cold, hard kernel of something other than grief began to form deep within her. It was a tiny, sharp-edged seed of doubt. It felt too neat, too tragic, too random. The NTSB investigation took nearly a year, a slow, bureaucratic grind that frayed Dana's already shattered nerves. She called the lead investigator's office weekly, her questions evolving from the grief-stricken queries of a mother to the pointed, specific questions of a researcher. They were patient at first, treating her with a kid-glove deference. Then, as her persistence continued, their tone shifted to one of patronizing condescension, and finally, to outright dismissal. She was just a grieving mother, they clearly thought, unable to accept the senselessness of a random accident, desperately needing a narrative, a conspiracy, to make sense of the senseless. Finally, a senior investigator, a man named Mark O'Connell with weary, bloodshot eyes and a perpetually sighed expression that spoke of too many years delivering bad news, agreed to meet her in person. He slid the final, bound report across the polished table of a sterile, windowless conference room. It landed with a soft, final thud. "Mrs. Jones," he began, his tone a well-rehearsed symphony of bureaucratic sympathy that set Dana's teeth on edge. "We have officially concluded our investigation. The definitive cause of the crash was a catastrophic failure of the tail rotor gearbox. This failure was due to a pre-existing fracture in a load-bearing gear shaft, which was caused by a faulty bearing. It was, in short, a tragic, unforeseen, and unavoidable mechanical failure." Dana stared at the report, its hundreds of pages filled with technical schematics, metallurgical analyses, and dry, emotionless prose. "A faulty bearing," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet, stripped of all emotion. "So, you are telling me that Lydia and Nathan's lives, their future, their children, their contributions to medicine, all of it was extinguished by a faulty $20 piece of metal. I know this is difficult to accept, Mrs. Jones. The randomness of it. Difficult." Dana's voice cracked like a whip, the sound startling in the quiet room. "Mr. O'Connell, my daughter and my son-in-law were two of the most meticulous, detail-oriented people on the planet. They were surgeons. Their entire lives were about precision, about checking and double-checking, about anticipating failure. The pilot, Frank Miller, had a perfect flight record spanning 20 years. He was known for his rigorous pre-flight inspections. And you want me to believe that on this one specific flight, a celebratory 40-minute tour of the city, a critical bearing that had passed all its recent inspections just happened to disintegrate? No." Her voice dropped to a low, intense hiss. "I don't buy it." O'Connell let out a long-suffering sigh, the practiced sympathy evaporating, replaced by a mask of undisguised frustration. "Mrs. Jones, we have exhausted every conceivable possibility. We've analyzed the maintenance logs from the past 5 years. We've reconstructed the wreckage. We've interviewed every mechanic who ever laid a hand on that aircraft. We've investigated the pilot's life, his finances, his family. There is no evidence of sabotage. There is no evidence of foul play. There is no evidence of anything other than a tragic, horrible accident." "Then your evidence is wrong," Dana said, her eyes, the same brilliant blue as her daughter's, locking onto his. There was no hysteria in her gaze, only a chilling, absolute certainty. You've missed something, or perhaps you don't want to see it. This wasn't an accident. I feel it. Here. She pressed a hand to her heart, her knuckles white against the black fabric of her dress. A mother knows. This was deliberate. Someone wanted my daughter and her husband dead. O con él se face hardened. He had had enough. With all due respect, ma'am, feelings are not evidence. Intuition is not a fact. The city needs to move on from this tragedy. And frankly, so should you. The case is closed. He stood up, gathering his papers, the meeting clearly over. Dana remained seated, her hands still pressed to her heart, the heavy, official report a tombstone on the table before her. The case may have been closed for him, for the city, for the world. But for her, the war had just been declared. She would find the evidence that he and his team were too lazy, or too incompetent, or perhaps too scared to find. She would tear down the wall of their comfortable, easy conclusions and expose the ugly, rotten truth she knew was hiding behind it. It would be her life's work, her final, sacred duty, her last act of love for her daughter. The first year was a landscape of raw, untempered grief, a disorienting blur of days that bled into one another without shape or meaning. There were mornings Dana couldn't summon the strength to get out of bed, the sheer weight of a world that continued to spin without Lydia in it too heavy to bear. But the cold, hard fire of her conviction, the mission she had given herself in that sterile conference room, always, eventually, burned through the suffocating fog. Grief could be a paralytic, but grief combined with rage was a powerful, inexhaustible fuel. She sold a Degas sculpture her late husband, an astute art collector, had acquired years ago. The sale provided her with a substantial war chest. With it, she hired her first private investigator, a grizzled ex-NYPD homicide detective named Sal Vitale. Sal's office, a cramped, dusty space above a pizzeria in Little Italy, smelled of stale coffee, cigar smoke, and a lifetime of cynicism. He was a man who had seen the worst of human nature and believed very little of what he was told. "Look, Mrs. Jones," he'd said in their first meeting, his voice a gravelly rasp as he leaned back in his creaking chair, studying her over the rim of his glasses. "I'll take your money, but I gotta be straight with you. 99 times out of 100, the official report, especially an NTSB report, is the whole story. These guys are thorough. Accidents, even horrible, unbelievable ones, happen. This is the one time, Mr. Vitale," Dana had replied, her voice cool and steady, her grief locked away behind a wall of pure resolve. Her composure seemed to intrigue him. "I'm not looking for comfort. I'm not looking for closure. I'm looking for the truth. Find me the proof." For 2 long, grueling years, they worked together. Sal was methodical, a bulldog. He re-interviewed everyone, from the air traffic controllers who had handled the flight, to the mechanics who had serviced the helicopter, to the friends and family who had been at the wedding. He was looking for the crack, the nervous tick, the slip of the tongue. Dana, meanwhile, dedicated herself to becoming an expert on helicopter mechanics. Her apartment, once a showcase of art and literature, now overflowed with engineering manuals, metallurgical textbooks, and aviation engineering treatises. At night, she would sit at her dining room table, a single lamp illuminating the complex schematics, cross-referencing every line of the NTSB report, her daughter's analytical mind seemingly channeled into her own. Her living room, once a place of warm, lively gatherings, began its slow, inexorable transformation into what she would come to think of as her war room. A large corkboard went up, the first of many, displaying a meticulously detailed timeline of Lydia and Nathan's fatal day. But they found nothing. A ghost trail. The mechanics had ironclad alibis. The pilot's financials were clean. No sudden windfalls, no crippling debts, no evidence of blackmail. The company in Ohio that had manufactured the faulty bearing was a reputable, family-owned business with a 40-year history of excellence. Sal, his leads exhausted and a significant portion of Dana's war chest depleted, finally, reluctantly, bowed out. "I'm sorry, Dana," he said, the use of her first name a sign of the deep, grudging respect he'd developed for her. He looked genuinely regretful. "I've turned over every rock 3 times. There's just nothing there. Sometimes a tragedy is just a tragedy. Maybe it's time to let it go, for your own sake." "Thank you for your work, Sal," she'd said, her voice polite but betraying no hint of surrender. She wrote him his final check. "But I can't let it go. Letting go means letting them get away with it." The years began to bleed into one another, each one marked by the solemn, lonely anniversary at the Brooklyn Bridge. The 1990s slid by in a frustrating haze of new investigators, each one promising a fresh perspective, a new technique, each one ending in the same frustrating, expensive dead end. One, a slick, charming con artist from Miami, took her for $10,000 and a rare lithograph before disappearing without a trace. The experience left her more wary, more isolated, but not one iota less deterred. By the turn of the millennium, Dana's war room had become her entire world. The court boards now covered 3 of the 4 living room walls, a complex, sprawling, 3-dimensional spiderweb of red, blue, and yellow string connecting photographs, documents, maps, and thousands of her own handwritten notes. She had transcripts of every interview Sal had ever conducted. She had blueprints of the specific helicopter model. She had financial records, obtained through less-than-legal means by one of her more ethically flexible PAS, of everyone remotely connected to the case. She had built a fortress of data, and somewhere within its walls, she was convinced, lay the single fact that would bring the whole lie crashing down. She spoke to Lydia's photograph every night. It was a ritual, a briefing with her silent, smiling commander. "We hit another wall today, my love," she'd murmur, her fingers gently tracing the outline of her daughter's perfect, happy face. The mechanic from the Teterboro facility? The one who seemed nervous to Sal all those years ago? He died last year. A heart attack. Another door closed. But I'm not giving up. I'll find him. I promise you. I'll find the man who took you and your wonderful Nathan from me. The world outside her apartment changed dramatically. The internet, once a novelty for academics, blossomed into a global network. Dana, in her late 60s, a woman who had never owned a computer, bought one and taught herself to navigate the burgeoning digital world. She found online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries, aviation disasters, and conspiracy theories. She spent countless hours in the blue and white glow of the monitor, a ghost in the machine, sharing her theories with anonymous strangers across the globe. Most dismissed her as a crank, a classic case of a grieving mother lost in a self-made labyrinth of paranoia. But the act of sharing, of organizing her thoughts, of defending her position against skeptics, kept her mind sharp and her fire burning. By 2010, she was in her early 70s. Her steps were slower, a persistent ache had settled in her hip, but her mind was a razor. She hired a new kind of PI, a young, tech-savvy woman from Brooklyn named Maya, who specialized in digital forensics. Maya viewed the case through a modern lens. She tried to resurrect digital ghosts from the analog past. She cross-referenced old flight manifests with newly digitized financial records. She used facial recognition software on the wedding photos to identify every single guest, then ran deep background checks on all of them. But it was like trying to perform CPR on a body that had been dead for 2 decades. The crime had been committed in an analog era. The trail was cold, the tracks long since washed away by the relentless tides of time. On the 25th anniversary of the crash, in November of 2013, Dana felt a profound, bone-deep weariness settle over her soul. She stood at her usual spot by the bridge, the biting November wind whipping at her gray hair, the single white rose in her gloved hand trembling. For the first time in years, a sliver of true, terrifying doubt pierced her armor. What if you're wrong? What if you've wasted 25 years, a quarter of a century, the entire final act of your own life, chasing a phantom born of your own grief? What if it really was just a faulty bearing? The thought was a betrayal, a heresy, and she tried to push it away, but it lingered, a cold and unwelcome guest. She returned to her apartment, and the silence of it, usually a comfort, seemed to mock her. She looked at the walls, at the chaotic, sprawling monument to her grief and obsession. It suddenly looked less like a war room and more like the web of a madwoman. Maybe Salvatore, all those years ago, had been right. Maybe it was time to let it go. She sank into her worn armchair, the weight of a quarter-century of fruitless, lonely fighting pressing down on her. And for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to simply weep for the daughter she missed and for the woman she herself might have been. Leo Martinez was not your typical weekend hiker. He was a doctoral student at Columbia University, and his chosen field of study was the surprisingly complex and often overlooked world of urban ecology. His dissertation, a work of painstaking research, focused on the resilience of native flora in environments that had been radically altered by human development, which is why, on a crisp, sun-dappled October afternoon in 2014, he was deep in a rarely visited, overgrown section of the park surrounding Castle Clinton at the southern tip of Manhattan. He wasn't looking for scenic views of the Statue of Liberty. He was looking for a specific, incredibly resilient species of fern, Asplenium platinaron, that had been documented in the area in the 1950s but hadn't been officially cited since. It was a botanical treasure hunt. He was carefully navigating his way through a particularly dense thicket of thorny, invasive Japanese barberry bushes, his canvas jacket snagging on the sharp branches, when his hiking boot caught on something solid just below the surface of the leaf litter. He stumbled, catching himself on the rough bark of a ginkgo tree to keep from falling. Annoyed, he looked down, expecting to see a jutting rock or a buried piece of old concrete, the usual urban detritus. Instead, he saw the corner of something dark and leathery peeking out from beneath the tangled, shallow roots of the bushes. His academic curiosity, always simmering just below the surface, was instantly piqued. He knelt down, pulling a pair of worn gardening gloves from his battered field pack. He began to dig carefully at the damp, loamy earth, a slow, almost archaeological process that took nearly 20 minutes. As he worked, he slowly revealed the shape of an old leather satchel. It was in remarkably poor condition, the leather cracked and stiff with age and moisture, the brass buckle a mottled, cancerous green with verdigris. It looked like it had been there for a very, very long time, a silent witness to decades of changing seasons. His heart began to beat a little faster. This was not part of his research, but it was undeniably a discovery, a time capsule of some sort. He worked the rusted buckle free with a determined effort, the metal groaning in protest before finally giving way. The satchel opened with a soft, mournful sigh of long-trapped air, releasing a musty, earthy smell of decay and damp paper. Inside, a stack of what might have once been papers had mostly fused into a solid, moldy block of pulp, utterly unsalvageable. But one item, a small, leather-bound journal, seemed to have been partially protected by its thick cover. It was warped and stained, but intact. Leo carefully, reverently lifted it out. He sat on a fallen log, his fern-finding mission now completely forgotten, and gently opened the journal. The pages were the consistency of damp cloth. The ink, a faded blue-black, had bled into faint, ghostly patterns in many places. It was a battle to decipher the looping cursive, but he could make out dates, written at the top of each entry. October 1988, November 1988. He could make out words, fragments of a life. Pressure, debt, my family, Sarah, the kids. Then, in the final few entries, the handwriting changed. It grew frantic, desperate, a sloping, almost illegible scrawl, the pen having pressed so hard it had nearly torn through the page. The words were clearer here, as if written with a sense of urgent, terrified finality. November 19th, 1988. He called again. The director. The voice is always so calm. That's the scariest part. Said the plan is tomorrow. No choice. He knows where Sarah and the kids live. He sent a photo to my home. A photo of my little girl on the swing set in our yard. Taken from the woods behind the house. Oh God, God help me. November 20th, 1988, 4 p.m. Change of flight plan. Not the scenic tour. A specific route. Over the river. A package to be delivered after. He said if I do this, the debt is cleared and they leave my family alone. If I don't, I can't think about that. The couple is here. The bride and groom. They look so happy. So young. They have no idea. God forgive me. Forgive me for what I have to do. Leo's blood ran cold. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He knew the date. He was a New Yorker, a history buff with a penchant for the city's more famous tragedies. He knew the story of a young surgeon couple who had perished in a helicopter crash on their wedding night. It was a famous piece of city lore, a heartbreaking story of love and loss. The director, a package. This journal, this wasn't just an old, lost item. This was a piece of a crime. This was the whisper of a ghost, a voice that had been silenced for 26 years, crying out from a shallow, leafy grave. He pulled out his cell phone, his hands trembling so much he could barely unlock the screen, and dialed 911. Detective Isabella Rossi of the NYPD's Cold Case Squad was a woman who lived comfortably in the past. Her world was composed of faded, sepia-toned photographs, brittle, yellowed documents, and the lingering, ghostly echoes of long-forgotten crimes. She was a patient historian of violence and heartbreak. So when the call came in from the precinct about a hiker finding an old journal in a park, she was initially professionally skeptical. More often than not, these dramatic discoveries turn out to be hoaxes, creative writing projects, or at best heartbreakingly irrelevant. But when the journal landed on her desk, sealed in a sterile evidence bag, her skepticism began to wane. She read the lab's transcription, the raw, desperate fear in those final entries feeling chillingly authentic. This wasn't fiction. This was the testament of a man at the end of his rope. She ran the pilot's name, Frank Miller, and had a patrolman retrieve the original case file from the deep archives. It was a heavy, dusty box, a cardboard coffin for a story everyone thought was finished. She saw the official conclusion, accident. But the transcribed words of the journal in front of her screamed something else. They screamed murder for hire. In the file, under the section for next of kin, was a name, Dana Jones. And stapled to it were over a dozen supplementary reports, detailing her persistent calls, her letters, her unsubstantiated theories of foul play. The original detectives had clearly dismissed her as a hysterical, grieving mother. But Rossi had a guiding principle, one that had served her well over her long career. Never dismiss a mother's intuition. It's the closest thing to forensics a ghost can provide. She drove to Dana's apartment on the Upper West Side herself. She was expecting to find a frail old woman, perhaps lost in her memories, whom she would have to gently guide through the process. Instead, she was met at the door by a sharp, formidable woman with eyes that burned with a fierce intelligence. Before Rossi could even introduce herself, Dana spoke. "I've been waiting for you, or someone like you, for 26 years, for months and 7 days," she said, her voice completely steady. "I assume you're here about the pilot's journal." Rossi was completely taken aback. "How did you—" "It's on the police band scanner I've had in my kitchen since 1989, Dana said, a flicker of something that might have been a grim smile on her lips. "Come in, detective. I have a great deal to show you." Rossi stepped into the apartment and froze in her tracks. In her 25 years on the force, she had seen hundreds of crime scenes, command centers, and investigation boards. She had never seen anything like this. It was the most extensive, detailed, and obsessive civilian-compiled investigation she could ever have imagined. The War Room was a breathtaking, slightly terrifying monument to a quarter-century of relentless, methodical obsession. Dana, no longer just a victim's mother, but now a seasoned investigator in her own right, walked her through it. Her voice was clear and steady, her mind a steel trap. She pointed out metallurgical inconsistencies in the NTSB report that she had discovered through her own research. She highlighted the suspicious, almost impossible timing of certain events. She laid out a theory of a conspiracy so vast, so audacious, and so evil that it took Rossi's breath away. "All these years," Rossi murmured, her gaze sweeping from the chaotic web of string on the corkboards to the resolute old woman standing beside her. "You've done all this yourself. A mother's work is never done, Detective," Dana said simply. "Dead or alive." Rossi left Dana's apartment hours later, not with a sense of pity for a grieving mother, but with a profound sense of awe in a new, powerful, and deeply motivated partner in her investigation. The case of Lydia Jones and Nathan Landry was officially and explosively reopened. With Dana's encyclopedic research as their roadmap, Rossi and her small, dedicated team began to dig. They focused on the mysterious figure of the director. In 1988, the director of New York General Hospital had been the celebrated, almost mythically revered Dr. Alastair Finch. Now in his late 70s, he was long retired, living like a king in a sprawling limestone mansion on the Upper East Side, a respected, untouchable elder statesman of the global medical community. Rossi's team started by quietly interviewing retired nurses and hospital administrators from that era. At first, they were met with a wall of silence. Dr. Finch was a legend, a benefactor, a god. But Rossi was persistent and persuasive. She found a retired surgical nurse named Eleanor, a woman who had been a close friend of Lydia's. After much gentle prodding, over tea in Eleanor's small, quiet apartment in Queens, the old woman's carefully constructed dam of fear finally broke. Nathan was worried. Eleanor whispered, her teacup trembling in her hands, her eyes darting nervously towards the window. A few weeks before the wedding, he came to me. He was always so ethical, so by the book. He was looking at the transplant lists. He said things didn't add up. He said it was a statistical impossibility. Patients at the bottom of the list, wealthy patients from overseas, were getting organs overnight, while people at the top of the list, regular New Yorkers, were dying on the vine, he called it. He said he was going to talk to Dr. Finch about it, that there must be some logical explanation. Did he talk to Finch? Rossi asked, leaning forward, her voice a gentle whisper. Eleanor nodded, a single tear rolling down her wrinkled cheek. Yes. And the next day, Nathan seemed scared. I'd never seen him scared before. He told me Dr. Finch had been very charming, very reassuring. He'd told him it was all just a series of clerical errors, a new computer system that was still buggy. But he also told him, and I'll never forget the words, that unfounded accusation from a junior surgeon can be very damaging to a promising young career. Nathan said it didn't feel like advice. It felt like a threat. This was the motive they had been searching for. Using the information from the pilot's journal, they identified the package he was meant to transport. Frank Miller had been scheduled to make a late-night medical transport flight to a private hospital in Connecticut after he dropped off the Landrys. The transport was for a set of donor organs, a heart and 2 kidneys. Rossi's team, with a new warrant, dug into the hospital's sealed archives. The organs came from a John Doe, a homeless man who had supposedly died of massive cerebral hemorrhage in an alleyway just hours before the crash. But there was no police report of the body being found, no 911 call, no autopsy from the city's medical examiner. He was a ghost, a non-person whose only record of existence was in the hospital's internal files. Those organs, Rossi discovered through a painstaking paper trail, had gone to a fantastically wealthy Saudi prince who had been on the bottom of the official transplant list, a man who had made a substantial donation to a research foundation controlled by Dr. Finch just weeks earlier, and the surgeon who performed the brilliant, life-saving operation, a surgery that had made international headlines for its speed and success. Dr. Alastair Finch himself. The pieces were all there, a horrifying mosaic of evil. Finch was running a black market for human organs. Nathan Landry, with his sharp mind and unwavering ethics, had stumbled upon it. The wedding provided the perfect, tragic cover for an accident. A helicopter crash was clean, dramatic, and would easily be attributed to mechanical failure in an era before ubiquitous black boxes. Finch had blackmailed the pilot, using his family as leverage into ensuring the crash was fatal and unsurvivable, a final, terrible act in his service. It was a conspiracy of monstrous arrogance, breathtaking greed, and pure, unadulterated evil. Detective Rossi looked at the file on her desk, at the beautiful, smiling, vibrant faces of Lydia Jones and Nathan Landry on their wedding day, and then at the glossy photograph of the distinguished, silver-haired Dr. Alastair Finch, taken at a recent charity gala. And she felt a cold, hard rage settle in her gut. It was time to bring the god to justice. It was time to show the monster the inside of a cage. The arrest of Dr. Alastair Finch sent a seismic shockwave not just through New York City, but through the international medical community. The image of the dignified, elderly doctor, a man whose name was synonymous with healing and hope, being led by Detective Rossi in handcuffs from his palatial Upper East Side mansion, was a stunning, surreal spectacle. It was the lead story on every news channel on the planet. The media, smelling the biggest, most sordid story in years, dubbed it the trial of the century, a gripping, horrifying tale of greed, genius, and murder hidden for decades behind a carefully constructed facade of philanthropy and prestige. The courtroom was a theater of high drama from day one. It was packed to the rafters with journalists, legal scholars, and the morbidly curious. Dr. Finch, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored Seville rose suit, looking more like a visiting Nobel laureate than a man on trial for triple murder, sat beside his dream team of high-priced defense attorneys. An expression of detached, intellectual amusement was fixed on his face, as if he were observing a particularly tedious and poorly executed surgical procedure. Across the aisle, in the front row, sat Dana Jones. Every day, she wore the same simple, elegant black dress, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her expression was a mask of calm, her posture perfect, her presence a silent, powerful, unmovable counterpoint to Finch's theatrical arrogance. She was not just a spectator. She was a sentinel, the keeper of the memory of the victims, her gaze a laser beam of righteous fury that she kept fixed on Finch's face. The young assistant district attorney, a sharp, tenacious, and fiercely intelligent man named David Chun, laid out the prosecution's case in his opening statement. His voice, clear and resonant, filled the silent courtroom. For 26 years, he began, taking a long pause to look at the jury, the deaths of Dr. Lydia Jones and Dr. Nathan Landry were considered a tragedy, and they were. A tragedy of monumental proportions. But they were not, as the defense would have you believe, an accident. They were an execution. A calculated, cold-blooded, and ruthlessly efficient execution orchestrated by one man. He turned slowly, deliberately, and pointed a finger directly at the defendant's table. They were executed by Dr. Alastair Finch, a man who held life and death in his hands every day and decided that his own greed was more valuable than his sacred oath. He perverted his gift to heal into a license to kill for profit. The trial, which lasted for 6 grueling weeks, was a slow, meticulous, and often horrifying unearthing of Finch's monstrous enterprise. The pilot's journal, authenticated by forensic experts, was read aloud by a stoic court clerk. Frank Miller's frantic, terrified words about the director and the package echoing in the hushed, cavernous room. Eleanor, the retired nurse, took the stand. Her voice trembled, but her memory was crystal clear as she recounted Nathan's fears and Finch's veiled, chilling threats. Financial experts from the FBI created a dizzying but undeniable flowchart that traced the millions of dollars that had flowed from wealthy foreign nationals into a web of shell corporations and charitable foundations controlled exclusively by Finch. The most damning testimony came from a former hospital administrator, a portly, sweating man named Arthur Klein, who had been granted full immunity in exchange for his cooperation. He described, in chilling, bureaucratic detail, how Finch's black market network operated. He spoke of how donors, often homeless, undocumented, or mentally ill individuals, were identified by scouts, brought to private clinics, declared brain dead under highly suspicious circumstances, and their organs harvested for Finch's exclusive, high-paying clients. He called it expediting the divine will, Klein said, his eyes fixed on his own pudgy hands, unable to look at Finch. He truly believed he was a superior being, that he had the right to decide who was worthy of life and who was, in his words, human surplus. When Finch himself took the stand in his own defense, he was a masterful performer. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly convincing. The voice of a man who had spent a lifetime reassuring terrified patients and charming wealthy donors. He dismissed the pilot's journal as the tragic, paranoid ravings of a deeply disturbed and indebted man. He painted Eleanor as a lonely, disgruntled former employee with a faulty, sentimental memory. He claimed that complex financial transactions were perfectly legitimate, if complex, overseas investments. Mr. Chun, Finch said during a blistering cross-examination, a condescending, patronizing smile playing on his thin lips. You are weaving a fantastic, melodramatic narrative worthy of a cheap paperback novel. The simple, boring, and tragic truth is that a helicopter suffered mechanical failure and crashed. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy. To try and twist that personal and civic tragedy into some grand, operatic conspiracy in order to tarnish my life's work and my reputation is not just absurd, it is grotesque. But Chun, armed with Dana's 26 years of research, was relentless. Dr. Finch, on the night of November 20th, 1988, a night you claim was just a tragic coincidence. You performed a heart transplant on Prince Khalid Al Saud, correct? I did. It was a landmark surgery, one of which I am immensely proud. And the heart for that surgery came from a John Doe, a man with no identity, no history, who conveniently died just hours before, and whose body was cremated by your private service before the city's medical examiner could even perform an autopsy, correct? The timely arrival of a donor organ is a miracle we in the medical profession see often. Thank God, Finch replied smoothly, his eyes devoid of emotion. A miracle you expedited, Doctor. Chun pressed, his voice rising. A miracle that required the permanent silencing of two of your own brilliant young surgeons, who were on the verge of exposing your grotesque and murderous business. Finch's legendary composure finally, catastrophically, cracked. The mask of calm, intellectual superiority dissolved, and for a fleeting second, the jury saw the monster beneath. A flash of pure, venomous hatred crossed his face. You have no proof, he hissed, his voice losing its cultured calm, becoming a reptilian hiss. You have nothing but the fantasies of a grieving, hysterical woman. We have 26 years of a mother's love as proof, Doctor, Chen retorted, his voice dropping to a powerful, quiet register as he gestured towards Dana in the front row. And now, thanks to her, we have the truth. The jury, a cross-section of 12 ordinary New Yorkers, deliberated for 3 long days. To Dana, it felt like another lifetime. She sat in her apartment, the silence a roaring, deafening void, unable to eat or sleep. She refused to hope. Hope was a luxury she had given up decades ago. She simply waited for the final act. Finally, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. She returned to the courtroom, her heart a trip hammer against her ribs. She watched the 12 jurors file back into the jury box, their faces grim, solemn, and unreadable. The courtroom was so quiet she could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. The foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, stood and handed a folded piece of paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The judge read it, his face impassive, and handed it back to the foreman. On the charge of murder in the first degree of the victim Lydia Jones Landry, the foreman read, his voice clear and strong, resonating through the tense, silent room. We the jury find the defendant, Alastair Finch, guilty. A collective gasp, a wave of sound, swept the courtroom. On the charge of murder in the first degree of the victim Nathan Landry, we the jury find the defendant, Alastair Finch, guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree of the victim Frank Miller, we the jury find the defendant, Alastair Finch, guilty. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The words were a drumbeat of justice, a final, powerful benediction. They were the two words Dana had spent a lifetime waiting to hear. Finch's face, for the first time in the entire trial, crumpled. The mask of arrogant superiority dissolved into a mask of pure, ugly, sputtering disbelief. His world, the world he had built on his own perceived godhood, had crumbled to dust around him. He was no longer a legend. He was just a small, evil old man, a murderer who had finally been caught. Dana closed her eyes, and for the first time since she had received that terrible, world-shattering phone call so long ago, she felt the crushing, suffocating weight on her chest begin to lift, a slow, painful, and glorious release. Dana did not join the jubilant, chaotic crowd that spilled out onto the courthouse steps. A maelstrom of reporters shouting questions and prosecutors giving triumphant statements to the cameras. She slipped out a side door, a quiet, anonymous figure moving through the afternoon city streets like a ghost, oblivious to the blare of traffic and the throng of pedestrians. The city, which had for so long felt like an adversary, a vast, indifferent place that held its secrets too close, now seemed different. The late afternoon sun, breaking through the clouds, felt warmer on her skin. The air, for the first time in decades, felt easier to breathe. She walked, as she always had, as if pulled by an invisible tide, towards the Brooklyn Bridge. But this pilgrimage was different from all the thousands of others that had come before. It was not a mission of defiance, a renewal of a battle vow. It was a journey of peace. She stood at her usual spot on the promenade, the place where the roar of the city met the vast, gray expanse of the water, and she looked out at the river that had been both a tomb and a silent, patient witness. She thought of Lydia and Nathan, and for the first time, the images that came to her mind were not of the crash, not of the loss, but of their wedding day. She saw them full of life, full of a love so potent it seemed to sparkle in the air around them, full of a limitless, brilliant promise. She could almost hear their laughter, see Nathan's warm smile, feel the fierce, joyful energy of her daughter. The anger, the white-hot rage that had been her constant companion for 26 years, the rage that had been her fuel and her shield, was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving behind not emptiness, but a vast, quiet, profound sadness. It was a clean sadness, though, a grief no longer tainted and twisted by the poison of injustice. It was just the pure, simple, heartbreaking sadness of a mother who missed her child. She held the single white rose in her hand, its petals as soft and perfect as she remembered her daughter's cheek being. For years, this rose had been a symbol of a promise, a vow to keep fighting, a declaration of war. Today, it was a symbol of a promise fulfilled. It was a peace treaty. "It's over, my love," she whispered to the wind, her voice not a cry of anguish, but a soft, clear murmur of release. "It's finally over. You can rest now. You and your wonderful husband. All the fighting is done. You can finally rest." With a gentle, deliberate motion, she leaned over the railing and released the rose. It fell, a single spot of pure, perfect white against the deep blue-gray of the water, and was caught by the current. She stood and watched as it floated away, a tiny, solitary vessel carrying a mother's unending love and a lifetime of sorrow, drifting slowly, inexorably, out towards the sea. Dana Jones stood there for a very long time, until the sun had finally dipped below the New Jersey skyline and the city had donned its glittering, indifferent cloak of night. She felt the cool evening breeze on her face, and for the first time in 26 years, it didn't feel like a lonely, mournful sigh. It felt like a gentle, cleansing caress. The war was over. The long, lonely vigil was ended, and in the quiet, peaceful sanctuary of her own heart, a heart that had been a battlefield for so long, she could finally begin to heal.